got it.
All right. Cool. Do you want to say something to start off, Justin? I'll pop up my screen and we can
Yeah,
get started.
absolutely. And if people want to make sure they're muted and just shut off your smiling faces, we'll invite you back to show your smiling faces. Question and answer time, but so yeah, so we
Mama's in a meeting, baby.
just see what's okay. So yeah, so welcome. This is kind of the kickoff of our season. So Feed New Hampshire helps us bring this content throughout the season, different, it's called our learning series, and we bring different things about growing and gardening and how to kind of look at our system and our whole the ecological system of where we live and how we interact as humans. And so we thought it would be kind of a neat opportunity to have Dave share some of his knowledge around permaculture, because that is kind of encapsulates really everything. It's in a lot of the things that Dave has brought to Grow Nashua over the years, and that I have personally learned from him, have been very helpful, both in the garden and also just in life and how this applies across the board. So I was excited that he was up for sharing some of his knowledge with us. So without further ado, Dave McConville.
Thank you, Justin. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm excited to share some information. I want to make sure I don't overwhelm you because, as Justin said, permaculture can kind of be all-encompassing, and it can just be a very large subject and sometimes hard to wrap your head around. So I'm trying to encapsulate this, and hopefully when this presentation is over, you'll have an understanding of what permaculture is and how you might be able to apply it, not only to gardening, but to other aspects of your life. So for people who don't know me, I recognize a lot of people in the room, but my name is Dave McConville, and I'm a permaculture designer and educator. I was first introduced to the concept of permaculture back in 2007 when I was taking a workshop, a visioning workshop, to find your place in changing this world. And these concepts were introduced to me. And since then, I kind of took a little detour and have been studying and practicing permaculture ever since, and doing some teaching as well. So this photo here is of my backyard. Some of you may have seen this before from other classes, but this is late summer, and I have kind of a food forest back there, trying to grow as much food as I can, transition from consumer to producer. And so in permaculture, in our gardening strategies, we tend to focus on perennial food crops because you put a lot of energy up front, but then you can get yields for years with little to no maintenance. So as I said, been studying permaculture since 2007, been working with Justin. I think this will be our 7th season together, and we've done a lot of work around the city, putting in gardens, teaching people how to grow food and things like that. So gonna kind of move on to tonight's presentation. So I call this presentation Redesigning Our World, and it's kind of an idea to look at the world with a different lens, a different perspective, and see the systems that are in place and try to intercept those systems and maybe create new systems to replace those that do a better job with what we've learned over the centuries. So I'm going to kind of start by talking about some of the challenges that face us, and then I'll kind of get into the history of permaculture, where it came from, talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts about what permaculture is, and then get into some of the applications of permaculture. And I have some Q&A breaks in here to get your feedback, and if anyone has questions or has some feedback. So as I said, I'm going to start off looking at the challenges. So as a global civilization, we're facing a lot of challenges. On the top of everyone's list has to be climate change. Right, for 150 years or more, we've been digging up fossil fuels and burning them and putting carbon dioxide into the air. And as we know, it's a greenhouse gas, traps heat, and it's affecting our climate in ways by creating more powerful storms, more intense rain events, longer droughts, longer heat waves and dry conditions causing fires and burnings. And these intense storms can cause disruptions. Many people have to leave their homes and relocate. So there's a lot of disruption to our systems with climate change, not to mention the fact that it threatens our own existence. Peak oil is another challenge that we face, and I'm not sure if folks in this room are familiar with the term, but it's on the idea that there's a finite amount of oil on this earth, and there is. I know there's new discoveries here and there, but at some point we're going to reach peak oil production, and a lot of people say that we've already passed it, and we're going to need to replace that as an energy source. Just in terms of the systems that are in place are very dependent on fossil fuels. All of our manufacturing and transportation and supply chains and things like that are very fossil fuel dependent. So if fossil fuels, well, we've seen them get more expensive, but as price rises and it's harder to get them out of the ground, then it's going to be causing again disruptions in our systems. Not to mention the fact that oil and fossil fuels are very dirty business, both the extraction from the ground, which used to be, easy. If you see the old films of somebody puts a stake in the ground and a gusher comes out and the oil just can't wait to get out of the ground. But now they're having to pump down massive amounts of water laden with chemicals in order to frack and break shale formations in order to release oil deposits and natural gas deposits. And this practice is very destructive to our groundwater. It's the chemicals that go in there. We don't know what they are because for some reason fracking has been exempt from the Clean Water Act. So we don't know what kind of damage they're doing to our water system, but we know about people's wells being contaminated and such like that. So oil is kind of a dirty business, and we're also running out of it. So industrial contamination is another challenge that we face, right? We've all heard about PFAs and forever chemicals that are getting into our water and in our environment. That's just the latest of many, but for years you're hearing about arsenic and all of these other things from tanneries and stuff that have polluted waterways and soil, and not to mention the things that are burned and put into our atmosphere and polluting our air. So other challenges that we face are economic and political instability, right? We have wars going on. The latest and largest right now is the war in the Ukraine. Lots of energy goes into war machines, and they burn a lot of fossil fuel. They do a lot of damage. They inflict a lot of suffering and pain on people. The Ukraine is just one, but there are many wars and skirmishes and battles going on around the world, and at any time some events again could disrupt the systems that meet our needs. Economic instability, inflation has been on a tear over this past year. We have a wealth gap in this country. People are struggling to make ends meet. So we have all of these challenges that we are facing. To compound all that is population growth. Okay, so I was born in the 60s, and growing up in the 70s, I heard a term population explosion. Everybody was talking about this explosion in population and what are we going to do with all these people? How are we going to feed them? And you don't really hear that too much, but if you look at the graph in the lower right, you can see that explosion has happened. And in the last 120 years or so, we've added 6 billion people to the planet. Whereas for up until that time, there had only been 1 billion to 2 billion people across the planet. So we've really added a lot more people. A lot of people are using technology and burning fossil fuels, and so it's just compounded all of these challenges. So these things can seem kind of daunting, but what do these all have in common? These are all really systemic and cultural problems. These are systems that were put in place, maybe not by us or people in our generations, but the industrialists in the 1800s, when fossil fuels were discovered, these models came up, the industrial model, extracting resources, producing a product, selling that product and consuming it, and then discarding waste. And so that has been very destructive to our ecosystems and habitats. This photograph on the right is the tar sand pits up in Canada. And you can see what they do to a beautiful pristine landscape where they go in and they're just trying to dig up all of the sand, and then they have to put energy into extracting the oil from the sand and then transporting all of that oil. So they're destroying the ecosystems that help to clean our air, our water, and they're destroying habitat for lots of other animals and beings that are on this planet. So the industrial model, right? They're really trying to maximize profit. That's their bottom line. So capitalist industries have really tried to do the most to maximize profit, maximize earnings, and so they cut corners where they can, because nobody's really holding them accountable, right? I mean, our current political systems have some safeguards against that, and some departments and that are supposed to hold these people accountable, but our political system has really ground to a halt with the division that's going on. And so we're not really holding any of these large corporations and individuals who run these corporations accountable for the damage and destruction that they're doing to the earth that we all depend on. So as I mentioned, the destructive practices killing the ecosystems and destroying habitat, but they're also causing lots of pollution and large number of CO2 emissions. So starting off a presentation like this, you're like, oh my God, Dave, what can I do? This is all daunting. These are huge systems, global scale. What's, one person to do? We'll get into that, but the first thing that we have to kind of look at is that this is our call to action. Like, these are the things that are happening to our world. And so Carl Sagan says, no matter what it is that you want to do, you're not going to be able to do it if you can't breathe and you can't drink the water, right? So everybody really needs to get involved. So even though we as individuals did not create these systems that are causing this damage, we do depend on them and we do rely on them and use them. So it's really our responsibility to affect change in whatever way we can. So we really need to get involved. And so the question is, what do we do? So changing these systems is really daunting. To change these things, you really can't go about doing that. So in the world of permaculture, we take the advice of Buckminster Fuller, who said that you don't change the existing reality by working on that and fixing it. You actually create new systems or new models that are going to make that old model or system obsolete, and then it will starve off and atrophy. So that's what, when I talk about redesigning our world, that's what we need to do. All of the systems that are in place to meet our needs, our physical needs, our food, our clothing, our shelter, building materials, all of these, gadgets, electronics, appliances, tools, all these things that we use, we have to create new models to do them in a much more environmentally sound way. And so this is where permaculture comes in. So, so some of us have heard the term permaculture and have an idea what it is, and we think, oh, it's gardening, it's a particular style of gardening and stuff, but it is much more than that. And there's a saying in the permaculture community that there are as many definitions of permaculture as there are permaculture designers, because it's really kind of hard to encapsulate in a sentence. So with that said, this is my stab at defining permaculture. So I'm just going to kind of read this out. I know that's a kind of a taboo in presentations, but permaculture is a holistic, ethically based design process with its principles rooted in the observation of natural patterns with the intent of creating systems that meet human needs in an ecologically harmonious way. So that's kind of what I say about it. And that's kind of a mouthful, but it's holistic. So it means we take a look at the big picture. We want to look at how materials are sourced, how they're manufactured, what labor is used, what you can do with that product after you use it. Is it compostable? Can it be salvaged? Can it be repurposed or whatever? We want to look at, from beginning to end, all of our systems. And it's ethically based, and we'll get into what the ethics are shortly. Oh, what's happened here? Oh, there we go. So what is permaculture? So it can be described as a lot of things. First and foremost, it's really a design process. It gives you a procedure and steps to go through in order to design a new system. And we'll get into what that process is a little bit down the road, but it's also a philosophy to live by. All of the ethics and principles can be applied to living your daily life, to your self-care. And it's a framework for making decisions, making good decisions that benefit the earth, that benefit the people and benefit the future. Permaculture also gives you, as I said, kind of a new lens that lets you look at the world in a different way, and you can see things that you might not have seen before by recognizing certain patterns in society, or just thinking deeper rather than only think about a product once it's in your hands. Think about where that product comes from, who manufactures it, how far it traveled, all of these types of things. So that just gives you this perspective. And it's also a regenerative movement. People all over the world are practicing permaculture, and they're trying to change the world. It's really literally and figuratively a grassroots movement where it's popping up all over the place, and people are empowered to find their own solutions. So permaculture, first of all, doesn't say I have all the answers. It says here's a way for you to figure out the answer. Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about that. So Toby Hemingway, who is the author of Gaia's Garden, which is a great introduction to home-scale permaculture, he said that permaculture gives us a toolkit for moving from a culture of fear and scarcity to one that's based on love and abundance. So, that sounds like a much nicer way to live in love and sharing the abundance, rather than being fearful of the other, fearful of not having enough, and hoarding and holding on tight. So what's in that toolkit? Well, there's a set of ethics: care for the earth, care for the people, care for the future, right? That guide us in all of our decisions and all of the things that we do. There are a set of principles that are all based on observing natural patterns and systems, and there are also a set of proven strategies. A lot of them have to do with gardening and food production, soil building, composting, rainwater harvesting, irrigation, gray water, but there's also community building strategies, energy strategies, things like that can help us when we're in a situation we say, oh, that will work for me, I can use it. But permaculture also gives you this last powerful tool, which is the design process, that if you don't have a strategy, a proven strategy, then you can design a new system and come up with your own strategies. Okay. So this is a quote by Bill Mollison. He's one of the co-creators of permaculture along with David Holmgren. And this is called the prime directive of permaculture, is what this quote is called. And it's that the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our existence and those of our children. So that doesn't mean that we have to be responsible for growing 100% of our food, and we have to make our own clothes, and we have to build our own homes, and all of this stuff. But it means that we are responsible for every product that we buy, every dollar that we spend. Where is that money going? Who is it going to? Again, back to tracing the source of materials, the labor that was involved. Are people being paid a living wage? Is this made in sweatshops? Things like that. All of these kind of things that we need to take responsibility for. Okay, so a little bit of history. As I said, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, the two credited with creating permaculture, and this was back in the 70s. They're from Australia, and they were in academia, and they were studying the industrial food system, wondering, is this going to be able to feed this growing population? As I mentioned, in the 70s, the growing population was a huge topic, not so much anymore. And they found out what we know now, that it couldn't, and that industrial agriculture is a very destructive process. It mines the soil for minerals. It doesn't replenish the soil. It poisons and pollutes our soil with chemicals from synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. Those often run off of farms through irrigation or rain events and get into our streams and creeks and rivers and into the ocean. So we have huge algae blooms off the ocean from all this fertilizer that has flown down rivers. As we talked about, it's also very dependent on fossil fuels. So it pollutes the air as well by releasing particulate pollution as well as carbon dioxide. There's a documentary called The Power of Community. It's a story about how Cuba survived peak oil when the Soviet Union fell back in the early 90s. Fuel on the island of Cuba increased tenfold, and they couldn't afford to grow their own food. So there was a whole, revolution as to how they produce their own food, and with urban agriculture projects and all of this stuff. But I bring that up. First of all, it's a wonderful movie, but second of all, in that movie, they talk about industrial agriculture is the second greatest producer of carbon dioxide behind the United States Department of Defense. So, these are the things that we have to kind of look at. So looking at the industrial food system, growing population, they were trying to find a more permanent form of agriculture. And the word permaculture comes from the contraction of those two terms, permanent agriculture. However, it has kind of morphed into permanent culture because the principles and the design process can be applied to all systems, not just food systems. So when they were coming up with the concept of permaculture, they didn't reinvent the wheel. They kind of went back and they looked at indigenous cultures around the world, and they had relationships with nature and lived in harmony with nature for thousands of tens of thousands of years before the advent of cheap energy came, and Western civilization kind of came and kind of rolled over the indigenous peoples. So we have a picture here on the right, which is a illustration. These are chinampas, which are garden beds from central Mexico, the indigenous people who lived there when the Spanish came. The Spanish came into what is now Mexico City, and they saw this giant city of 200,000 people. And it was essentially a city on top of a lake. It was all canals, and they had all of these gardens that they built these little man-made beds in these gardens. So, rather than bring the water to where the food grows, they grew the food where the water was, and they get nutrients from, they can just dig up the bottom of the ocean to add fertilizer to their thing. They can hunt and fish. There's waterfowl, there's fish there. So it was just this really integrated system of food production. And it sustained, as I said, a city of, a couple 100,000 people. Holmgren and Mollison also looked at natural systems because they found that the indigenous people really understood how nature worked, and they worked with it rather than against it, rather than trying to conquer it. They tried to use nature and guide it to help it out. And so they also looked at modern technology and said, what's available in modern times that wasn't available then, that we can use in a more intelligent way, using appropriate technology at the appropriate scale in order to create systems that are more ecologically sound. So some of the foundations of permaculture are natural patterns, right? Patterns exist in nature because they serve a particular function. So I'll just talk about a couple here, but that front and center picture of a drawing of a tree, you have the branches and the roots that you can kind of see they're almost mirror image. But the branch pattern is a pattern that collects and distributes materials, right? So we have the roots in the ground, they're all spread out, they're creating lots of edge in contact with a lot of different soil, they're absorbing water, nutrients, and they're collecting that and then funneling that up the tree, and then it goes out to the branches and to the twigs and then to the leaves. And then with the sunlight and the carbon dioxide, the water and the nutrients, photosynthesis occurs. The matter of the tree is created, as well as sugars are created. And then those sugars are taken, the excess sugar is taken and it funnels down the tree, and all the cells along the way take their share of sugar, but once they're full, they pass and share the abundance, and it ends up passing all that sugar down to the roots. And what the roots do is with that sugar is very interesting, because if you look at the last foundation here is relationships, we're finding out so much about the relationship between plant roots and mycelium. And mycelium is the body of mushrooms. So a mushroom is a fruiting body of mycelium, and mycelium is this underground network of single-celled threads, essentially hollow tubes that can transport water and nutrients and even hormones from trees and plants across this network to be taken up by other plants. So the roots of the trees take their excess sugar and they give that to the mycelium, because the mycelium cannot photosynthesize, that doesn't have access to sun, so it can't produce its own sugar. So there's this symbiotic relationship between these two plants. So a couple other things they looked at were cycles and processes of nature and understanding the cycles of nature. And so the lower diagram shows the growth decay cycle. And some of you may have seen this before just from some of my talks on gardening and talking about composting and soil health. But, essentially a plant starts to grow, a seed germinates, thank you, germinates and turns into a seedling and grows, comes to fruition, creates a flower, a fruit, some seeds, the plant dies off, and then the soil, or more accurately, the organisms in the soil kind of take that plant and they break it down back into nutritional building blocks so that they're available to be taken up by another plant. So understanding how these cycles work, understanding these processes, and understanding the relationship between all of the elements. So these are some of the foundations. So some of the things that permaculture values is, resiliency and efficiency. So from a human, nature is very resilient, right? We know that if there's a storm or some a tree falls down and there's some disturbance event and soil gets overturned, it doesn't take long for nature to kind of come back and cover that soil and grow something else there. So it can handle these disruption events. So we want to model our systems to be able to withstand disruption. And so in permaculture, we look for critical functions, and we want to make sure that critical functions are supported by multiple elements in a system. Right. So an example of that here in New England, talking about the winter weather and the cold, a critical function here is heat. So we had a ice storm back in 2008. I don't know how many people remember that, but across the Northeast here, there were a lot of people without power, some for weeks. Living here in Nashua, I was without power for 8 days, which seems, what, in a city? How is that? But we were on a cul-de-sac. 10 houses. It was kind of low priority for the electric company. So I had my gas boiler wasn't working, so I had no heat, but I have a wood stove. So I was able to keep my house warm, and I was able to stay in my house rather than some neighbors who had to go stay with friends who had power, or go to a hotel and leave their home. So, just an example of how we want to make sure that those critical functions are supported so that we don't suffer disruptions. So diversity is important. Diversity is important because with diversity comes a variety of skills, talents, knowledge, things like that. So the more diversity that you have, the stronger a community is. We see that in plant guilds in permaculture, using that as an example. If you put plants together that serve different functions, and I'll give the classic Three Sisters Guild, corn, beans, and squash, they're going to grow better together than individually. And how they help each other out is you have a corn stalk which grows tall, beans are a climber, they're going to climb up that corn stalk, and then the beans are what's called a nitrogen fixing plant. They take nitrogen from the atmosphere and store it in the soil, and corn, being a heavy nitrogen feeder, can feed off some of that nitrogen. So they help each other in that way. Whereas the corn on its own, you have to, add some sort of fertilizers rather than using biology or plants to do that work. Anyway, and just to wrap up that, the squash acts as a ground cover. Its broad leaves cover the soil, prevent volunteers or weeds from growing, and help to reduce moisture loss. So, this diversity and putting this diversity together makes a community stronger. So another example of diversity is like if you have a toolkit, right? And you have 100 tools in your toolkit. and they're all hammers. Well, you can only do so much with a hammer. You got 100 of them, that's really great, but you only can do two things really with a hammer. But if you have 100 different tools, you've got much more ability and skills and whatnot. So diversity is very important, highly valued. So the other thing we look at in permaculture is efficiency. Oftentimes permaculture designers are called energy accountants because they look at the energy returned on energy invested. So once you start getting less energy out of something that you put into it, then it's not worth doing. So we want to make sure what we're doing has the proper returns. The other thing we use for efficiency is the concept of zones. And this breaks down to a very simple concept. The more often you use something, the closer you put it to yourself. So if you use something every day, you're going to want to have that, very close, because you don't want to be traveling, a half a mile every day that you need to use this thing. So the image down below shows the 5 zones, with zone 0 being the house where you live, where you spend most of your time. Zone 1 is things that you need to do, nearly every day. So they're very close to the house. Zone 2 is going to be a little bit further away. Maybe you visit that a couple times a month. Zone 3 might be things that you visit a few times a season. And then zone 4 is kind of things that you visit, once or a couple times a year. And then zone 5 is kind of left to the wild, left for recreation and whatnot. So we can apply that to lots of different things. Zones are not just applied to physical, but say in transportation, if I'm just going down to the corner store, I'm not going to, I don't need to drive like a Humvee to get, my 200-pound body, 200 yards. I can walk. I can ride a bike if it's a little further. If it's a little further than that, I'll take an electric car, and, kind of work your way out until you get to the things that you do very rarely would be, fly. So anyway, just some examples of how zones can be used to break down different activities and making them efficient. All right, I guess I'll pause here and see. I saw a couple things in chat, so I don't know if there's any questions here or want me to.
I had popped in just a general invite if anybody wanted to pop in questions or to unmute themselves. I like the analogy of too many hammers.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's like, you have 100 hammers, unless you have 100 people using a hammer.
Yeah. I feel like there's it's hard to think of situations where, you talk about that diversity giving resilience, and whether it's in nature or it's on the Thanksgiving plate. You just had a bunch of turkey on your plate. I mean, what are we doing?
Right. Nutrition-wise, you're getting all your protein, so you're not getting your minerals. You're not
It's
getting,
right. It's hard to think of situations where having a variety and having different things doesn't make sense and doesn't equate to something better. So it does seem as though a lot of what is happening in our world is actually happening in a way where things are, the competition is being eliminated left and right. It's like small companies get eaten up by the big companies. And even I found the other day, I had bought a deodorant or something that was kind of more natural, had a few less of the bad things in it, and then they got bought. It's like they just get purchased by the bigger player, and then it's like those little players never really get big enough themselves to do the buying of other things. So it's like their values and their morals and what they were founded on, it's like they can only hold out so long, and then when someone offers them millions or $100 million, that's tough to say no to, I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the bigger companies and industries, they have deep pockets and they can buy out the competition and squelch that, right? And so the diversity is better for the consumer. You have more choice. You have price competition, things like that. So you get into monopolies and stuff that everyone will agree monopolies are bad for the consumer. They're good for their stockholders.
Yeah. One of the
Yeah.
questions Tess just mentioned, and I don't know if this might be coming up, but she was interested in talking a little bit about how these incorporate these principles into our home gardens.
Oh, right on. Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to focus too much on gardening tonight, but during the question and answer, we can talk about it. So one thing about the diversity is plant guilds, right? So rather than planting a monocrop and just planting, rows and rows of corn, then you plant little bunches of the three sisters where you have all these plants together. Another example of that is I always mix my herbs and my flowers with my vegetables in my garden. It helps to create a visual and aromatic camouflage. So pests who are trying to find a plant have a harder time to find it. If you have a cabbage looper and a row of cabbage, then it's just going to hop down from head to head and lay eggs on all of them, and all your cabbage is gone. But if every head of cabbage is camouflaged with marigolds and dill and all of these herbs, and it's going to be harder for that cabbage looper to find it. So that's another good way or example where diversity can help in a garden.
Dave deep dives into those too, in the probably maybe the training maybe in March or so would probably be.
Yeah, when we get more into the specifics of gardening and stuff. So yeah.
Right.
But feel free to, at the end, my contact information will be in this presentation, and there's also a resource folder which maybe Justin can put in the chat. I think he'll email to you also, but the slides are in there, and contact information. So you feel free to email me and ask more specific questions if we don't have time to get to that today. All right, so I'm going to kind of keep on moving here. Let's see. All right. So I'm going to get started talking about the ethics of permaculture. So these are the ethics: earth care, people care, and future care. So I'm going to kind of unpack those a little bit one by one. So one of the things when that kind of gets me is when you say, oh, we have to save the planet, we got to, take care of the earth. It's like the argument is, oh, the planet's going to be fine. It's like, well, yeah, no kidding. The planet itself is going to be here, but it might not support life. So when we talk about caring for the earth, we talk about caring for the ecosystems, caring for the environment that sustains our lives, right? And if you look at the earth, it is a living ecosystem and has systems and checks and balances that help to regulate temperature. And these are the things that we're all throwing out of whack with by deforestation, desertification, the pollution, the global warming, climate change. All of these things are making it much harder for the earth to regulate its own ecosystems. So I just thought I'd throw that out at the beginning, that we're talking about the environment on earth that supports life is what we're caring for. So this is a Cree proverb that, many of you have probably heard this before, but, once the last tree is dead, the last river is poisoned, and the last fish has been caught, we realize that we can't eat money. So, these are things to take care of. So it's like, while these systems are still savable, we need to really kind of take action. So, earth care, this quote here by Deepak Chopra, I saw him speak at a green festival out in San Francisco back in 2007, about the same time I was introduced to the concept of permaculture, and I heard him give this quote, and it's just a fantastic quote. And he says that we are the air recycled, we are the water recycled, we are the soil recycled. Right. So, I mean, if you think about that, with the growth and decay cycle, food grows, we eat it, things get put back into earth, we are just constantly breathing the same air. It's getting exchanged with plants who, help to clean the air and produce more oxygen and absorb the carbon dioxide that we exhale. But, the oxygen molecules are kind of the same, whether they're attached to a carbon molecule or not. So, I mean, it's just cycling all these nutrients through us and through our ecosystems. So I really love that. And so he goes on to say a couple things. One, he says that, we are the universe becoming aware of itself, which I think is really, it was mind blowing for me. It's like, oh my God, this consciousness is, I'm realizing what I am, what I'm made of, where I come from, stardust and the system. So, I mean, and we are all the individual instances of this universal consciousness. So that's a conversation for another day, but I always like to mention that because that just was like a wow moment. But he also said, if we are what we breathe, what we drink, and what we eat, then we are pollution, right? Our environment is just polluted. Buying organic is great. You're not getting the pesticides and the herbicides, but it's not guaranteed to be pollution free. The air that we breathe, so we are filtering the pollution out of the air and the water, and it's in us. So that right there is great incentive for us to do better. So, as Earth Care, then we're kind of dictated to, regenerate our ecosystems, right? Remediate pollution. Remediate means to, pull out and extract that pollution. And you can do that through a number of means. You can use bioremediation, using biology, remediation using plants. For example, mustard greens will extract lead from a soil. So if you test your soil and you find you have heavy metals and lead, then you plant mustard greens. Do not eat those mustard greens after you harvest them. Treat them like a hazardous waste, lead. But after a period of time, retest your soil, you'll find that lead is gone. So there's ways to use that. There's ways to use mushrooms, right? Mycoremediation, using the mycelium and the mushrooms to filter out pollutants. So Paul Stamets does amazing research with mycelium and the wonders that it can do both for our health, our spirituality, and also for remediating pollution. So his book is called Mycelium Running, and it's a wonderful read. I have all the books. I have a list of books in the resources with this. So if you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend it. So diversify our energy sources, right? We know that fossil fuels, the use of them is very destructive and polluting. So we need to diversify, and we also need to reduce waste, right? There's no waste in nature. You don't go out to the hike in the forest and find a dump out there, right? Waste is recycled either as food or fuel for some other organism, and nothing goes to waste. So we want to mimic that. So I realize the time here, so I'm going to kind of keep moving along here. So people care is the second ethic, right? We talked about 8 billion people on the planet right now. Every single one of them has physical, social, emotional, and spiritual needs, right? And these need to be met. And we're seeing, there are symptoms in our society that these social and emotional needs are not being met of people with all of the gun violence, the suicides, the depression, the drug use. All of these things are symptoms of a society that doesn't meet its people's needs. So, we strive to meet all of these needs, not just the physical. The industrial capitalist society meets our physical needs because there's money in it for them, and that's why it's done. So, we need to kind of look at these things and say, whoa, what about all this other stuff? So, people care, aside from the physical needs and growing food and energy and things like that, there are, building community, coming together, right? We live in very isolated society. We live in our boxes. We get in our little metal boxes and we drive to work. We sit in our little cubicle. We work all day to pay for a house that we're never at because we're working so hard to pay for it. It's just kind of a crazy thing. We're very isolated. And we might be connected, digitally, but the quality of connection and the depth of those connections is very shallow. So we also strive to find social equity, right? I love this little drawing down image in the lower right here about equality versus equity, right? Equality where everybody gets the same thing, but equity is where the people who need a little extra help get that, and people who don't need it, well, they don't need it. So, try to find that equity, and social justice, making sure that, justice is served. I won't go into that topic, but right livelihood, right? People working for a livable wage, a job that doesn't, take over their lives and leave space for them to enjoy their family, their friends, their activities or whatnot. So, finding that right livelihood. These are all part of people care. So the last ethic is called future care. Originally, David Holmgren and Bill Mollison called it fair share instead of future care. And it was all about not over consuming and sharing any abundance that you might have, which is why the icon is a slice of pie. Take only what you need, leave for the rest. We've become a very consumptive society, and we try to fill our emotional needs by accumulating things and over consuming, right? So that's where that comes in. A lot of people in permaculture started referring to this as future care, which is one that I like. I kind of like them both. They go hand in hand, because if you're doing your fair share and only taking your fair share, then you're caring for the future. But future care goes a little bit deeper. Just talk a minute about the indigenous peoples of the Americas, who understood that they were part of a long continuum, right? And they honored and revered the 7 generations that came before them, because they would not be where they are today without what came before them and who came before them and what they did. And they look forward to the 7 generations after them, and they want to make sure that they are taken care of and that they have what they need, and they have clean water and whatnot. So that concept has kind of gone away in our society. We're very much in the now and taking care of me, and so recognizing that you're part of a bigger continuum can be very beneficial. So let's see, transition from consumer to producer. This is part of future care. Rather than being consumption over consuming, let's start producing some of our own goods, using our resources more wisely. Talking about zones, I think the average meal in the United States travels 1,500 miles, right? So you eat several times a day, 2-3 times a day, then, you go 1,500 miles, each time to get that food. That's very inefficient. So how do we start producing more of what we use on a daily basis more locally? So you may have heard of the 100-mile diet, which is trying to eat all food that comes within 100 miles, eat regionally. So these are the kind of things that we can do, and reskill and localize things, right? The industrial model has taken it so that it's cheaper to mine from resources from one continent, and then manufacture in another continent, and sell the good in yet another continent, and then discard the waste in a third. So it's become a very wide global system here, and we need to kind of bring some of these things and produce our needs more local. So these are the principles. In the interest of time, I won't go into all of these, but you have a copy of the slides, and there's also a handout that for these principles. But these are the principles that help to guide and inform our designs. The first principle is observe and interact, right? Because you can't really start changing something if you don't understand what it is that you're working with. So in terms of a garden or a property, if you're doing a permaculture design for a new property, they recommend that you observe that property for a full year before you start to make changes. You want to understand the different seasons, the different angles of the sun, the rainfall, the snowfall, where things accumulate, how the water runs across the property. There's all sorts of things that you need to just kind of observe. If it's a little more rural, what kind of wildlife might migrate through there, or have be living there and using that space. So there's so much to consider and interact. I could go in depth. I could teach an hour on all of these principles. So I'm going to just kind of pick a couple that I really like and use a lot. Is use small and slow solutions, and apply, accept feedback, and apply self-regulation. So this is kind of a mode of operation for me, that I want to make small mistakes. Right. So you try something out on a small scale, make sure it works, so you don't lose a lot of time, energy, resources, effort in making a huge mistake, and then having to undo that mistake and then do it right. But you use small and slow solutions, and you figure out what's working, what isn't working, and you do more of what is working and adapt or change what isn't working. And you can see in through here, this produce no waste. We talked a little bit about that. I'll talk a little bit about designing from patterns to details, looking at the big picture, looking holistically at something, understanding the whole problem, and not getting bogged down in the details first, but trying to understand that greater pattern, and then flush out the details as you go. So, all right. So here's an image of our design process, and depending on your permaculture teacher, your design process may look a little bit different, but they all can kind of get distilled into the VAST model: vision, assessment, strategy, and timeline. And so the visioning is, determining what you want to do, setting your goals, your aims, your desires, understanding your needs, what you want to do, either with this system or with this property. And then, that's where you want to go. That's where you want to be. And then you start your assessment and you look at where you are, what resources you have. In terms of a physical garden, you're going to look for your sun sectors and your shady sectors. You're going to, need to understand, all sorts of physical properties and stuff like that. But if you're doing like a social structure, you're going to look at, what people are involved. What are we trying to accomplish? What skills do all these folks have? Things like that. And you do this assessment and analysis and look at each element and understand the inputs and outputs of each element, understand the intrinsic characteristics of each element that could be in the design. And so the assessment leads to strategy, where you determine what strategies you're going to use to accomplish your mission. So if you're trying to build soil, you might look at doing some sheet mulching or some hugelkultur, or growing some cover crops, or all sorts of different strategies that you could use. For energy, maybe you want to have some micro wind turbines, you want to have some solar panels, maybe some geothermal. You look at all of these strategies and figure out which one might work best in your situation. So there's a saying in permaculture that almost every answer to a question in permaculture starts with "it depends," right? Because there is no one cookie cutter answer. It all depends on climate, environment, resources, all sorts of things. So after you come up with your strategies, you develop a timeline, and a timeline sets your priorities, what you're going to do first. Maybe it's a multi-year timeline, and you're going to do some things in the first year, a couple in the second year, maybe years 3 to 5, you're going to do these other things. You're going to list out what materials you might need, costs and things like that, and come up with your budget and timeline. And then after an initial implementation of your design, you kind of start the whole process all over again. You start to accept feedback and apply self-regulation. What my system is working, what isn't working, and then you maybe do some revisioning, some reassessing. And so it's really an ongoing process and design. So this diagram is called the permaculture flower, and this is from David Holmgren from his book, Pathways and Principles Beyond Sustainability. And this just kind of shows that the ethics and the design principles of permaculture can be applied to any aspect of our society. It's not just about growing food, right? It can be, education and culture, finance, economics, governance, all of these things, building. You can apply all of these to any one of these aspects or sectors of our community. So I don't know, I just wanted to pause there and see if there are any questions on that mouthful.
Yeah. So we don't have any questions, and I wanted to suggest, I was just peeking ahead at some of the slides that you had upcoming on like the food shed, on economies, building community organizing, a lot of great content, energy. And I just wanted to, I think we should just kind of extend this out a half hour. I think you have a lot of great content, and if people have to go, they have to go, but that way your content doesn't need to feel rushed. And I think if people want to, if they have to jump off, they can jump off at any time. And obviously we will have the recording out later and the slides out later. I think for those of you that want to stay, there's a lot of great content coming up from Dave. So I think we should just jump right in and give you the space to share your stuff if you're good with that.
That sounds fantastic, Justin. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
Great suggestion. So,
Cool.
yeah, as I said, the recording will be available. The slides are available. So, and if questions come up, if you aren't able to stay, like I said, contact information is there. Send an email. Be happy to address anything that I am able to.
Okay.
All right, so let's just kind of talking about designing new systems. Like when you go into design a new system, you want to design with intention, right? And this is what separates kind of permaculture design from other design. I mean, some design is done with intention, but this is ethically based design, right? We're always going to be checking back on those ethics with every decision, every design thing we make. Is this good for the earth? Is this good for the people? And is it good for the future? So, have this intention, because the systems that we have today, they might have been designed by intention, but the intent of the designers, was different than what our intent as permaculture designers is, right? Industrialists coming out in the Industrial Revolution in the mid 1800s, all of this industrial power, the world is your oyster. They could do anything they wanted. They wanted to make the most of it, and they created these systems. And on a certain scale, they worked out okay. And there was certainly some early environmental damage along there, but the earth was in a state that it could absorb that and heal itself. But now at the scale that we're at, these systems, as they've grown larger, more people are using them. There's less natural space. Ecosystems are being destroyed. Our earth doesn't have the ability to heal itself. So anyway, just designing with intention, what your purposes are. And the other next thing to talk about is interdependency. And so what this means is, everything is interrelated and interconnected. And as I say that, the first time I heard that phrase, I was envisioning like a network pattern where every node is touching every other node. And if I do one thing, I'm going to affect everything over on that side. And it's not quite like that. It's more of everything is nested. And it exists in a context among some other things. So to give you an example of what this is, so we're all on this Zoom room together, but we are all in individual rooms, and we're in a computer, staring at our computer. I'm standing in my kitchen. I'm in my house. My house is in a neighborhood. It's in a city. So all of these things are nested within each other, and I don't exist by myself in anywhere. Things that I do are going to affect what's around me. So understanding the patterns and the nested patterns and that interconnectedness is important in doing design, because you have to be aware of what comes in contact with your design and how that's going to be affected. So I know that I hope that was clear. But we have to pay attention to interdependency, right? And no person does everything by themselves. We are doing what we are today on the backs of many, on those who came before us, and hopefully those who come after us will be better off for what we do. So again, back to designing new systems, talking about critical functions, right? They are critical, they are necessary, they are important. So we need to make sure in our designs that critical functions are supported by multiple elements, just reiterating that important point. And then in these new systems, right, we're trying to transition from consumers to producers. So keeping that in mind, in not necessarily the way we design a system, but which system we decide to design, right? So we want to design a system that helps us to produce something too. I think it was the third principle of permaculture: obtain a yield. When you're doing something, you want to obtain a yield, you want to produce something. So some of the goals, we've talked about these a little bit already. The goals of the permaculture movement and permaculture designers are to regenerate ecosystems, right? We, through the course of time, there have been a number of civilizations who have come and deforested areas and cut down all the trees, causing desertification. As we expand, 8 billion people, we all got to live somewhere. We're building new neighborhoods. We're cutting down ecosystems. Wetlands are getting affected, all these things. So we want to regenerate these ecosystems. Again, diversify our energy sources. We talked about that, so I won't go into that again, but these are some of the goals. So this next section, transition. So we kind of want to, this is like a shift from our current paradigm and our current global model to a different one. So the industrial capitalist world wants to really create one global village, right, where control is centralized at the top, the power of a few. They kind of control things. And as I mentioned, we're seeing this kind of going on today, where we have captains of industry who are mining materials in one continent and manufacturing goods in another continent, selling those products in a third, and taking the waste and going somewhere. And they're treating the world like it is all one village. Thanks to cheap energy, they're able to do what they can do, but there are vast consequences for that. So what permaculture envisions is more of a global network of villages, where each village is somewhat self-reliant, maybe not producing everything that it needs, certainly not producing everything it needs, but producing some portion of daily needs locally, and then bartering and trading across a global network with others to get these things. But we also have to shift our expectations and say, it's January in New England, I should not be eating strawberries from Chile. It's like, that's just, so we have to kind of change those things. So eat seasonally and producing our foods locally through preserved foods, to get us through the winter or whatnot. So anyway, so that's kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift, this global network of villages, but I think it's kind of an important one where individual villages have some sense of self-reliance. And in order to achieve that, we need to reskill local populations. And, that's not just growing food, saving seeds, preserving food, but metal workers, blacksmiths, woodworkers, people to spin yarn and make clothing and textiles and things like that have all been gobbled up by corporations, industrialists, and they have sent those jobs, to places where they get cheaper labor. So, we need to kind of bring things back. We need to find out what we have a passion for and reskill ourselves in our community. Let's see, and community building, I think, is the last one. My screen is blocked by a Zoom bar that I can't move, but I think community building is let me just change this for a second. All right, yes. Building community, right? We can't do this by ourselves. It's a daunting task for any individual to try to do any of this by themselves. So we really need to bring ourselves together, work in neighborhoods, work in communities, and start to affect change. So where to begin? Again, daunting task. It's like, we're not going to get this done overnight, but let's start where we can. And we start with the low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit is easy to grab and, quick benefits. So starting with energy, conservation and efficiency. So the difference between conservation and efficiency, right? The gentleman on the bike is conserving gas because he's not using any. Right, he's riding a bike instead. So that's conservation. He's conserving it for a time where he might have to, go 300 miles to visit a relative or something. But efficiency would be the LED light bulb. It's more efficient than an incandescent light, right? So if you're going to use electricity, use it more efficiently. So those are those concepts. We can look at all aspects of our lives, not just transportation and electricity, but try to conserve and consume less. That's one way that we can conserve. The less that we buy, the less that has to be made, right? So we buy a lot of stuff that we don't need. We buy things to try to fill emotional voids, to try to fill social voids, or things that are lacking in our life because we don't have strong community around us, and things are missing. So consuming less is a great way to make an impact. Food shed, I'll talk about in a minute. That's food shed is like a watershed. It's where all your food comes from, how you get your food. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. But building community, this is an important thing. Start relationships, start meeting neighbors. Go outside, meet a neighbor that you haven't met. Go to some community meetings. Try to develop some relationships. So the image in the lower right is something called the web game, and we often do this at the beginning of some permaculture workshops in order to demonstrate the resilience of a strong community. And so in this picture, I think there's only one connection between every individual, but the more connections you make with the more individual, the more lines that are going to be going across this web. And if you cut one or two, that web is still going to hold because there are enough lines in place that it's not going to collapse. So we want to build as many relationships as we can. We want to learn from people what their skills are, what their knowledge is, what their resources might be, what their needs are, and maybe we can match up resources that I have with somebody else's need, and we build a stronger community, and that adds resilience. So talking about food shed, as I mentioned, that's kind of where our food comes from. And so some things you can do to immediately impact where your food comes from is, grow your own food. Of course, right now we're in January, but it's a perfect time to start planting a garden. But growing your own food. I think in 1948, before World War II, 48% of homes in the United States grew some portion of their own food. Last I saw, it was about 10%. That number is probably on the rise because it's becoming more popular and more important with the pandemic and things like that. So, it's up and coming. But growing your food is really a revolutionary act against the industrialized capitalist systems. CSAs is a great way if you can't grow your own food. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And so essentially you buy a share into the farm at the beginning of a season or whatnot, and you're going to get a portion of food doled out at regular intervals. Oftentimes in the summer, you get a box of vegetables a week. If it's a meat CSA, maybe it's, once or twice a month. There are dairy, egg CSAs. You can do a search and find farms in your area that have some CSAs. Again, wintertime, so there aren't many farmers markets, but going to farmers markets and buying directly from farmers is a great way to support local farmers so they don't get gobbled up by the big industrial agriculture. Know your farmers. You can know how they grow their food. You can know if they use pesticides. You can have conversations with them. It's really a great connection. Food co-ops is another thing. I don't know if we have any around here. There was one that was getting started out in Wilton, but I don't think it made it. It lost some momentum. But essentially a food co-op, again, supports local farmers. They often buy lots of food from local farmers, but they also support food resellers who take products and create food, jams, jellies, preserves, wide variety of things. But it's a way to also have concentrated buying power. So if you're a member of a co-op, they're going to have more buying power and more influence on the food producers to get the kinds of foods that we want. Gleaning is another way. I know there's I think it's called NH Gleans. Is it Stacy Perslow? Sorry, I've forgotten her name. I think she's involved with that. But gleaning is basically going to farms after they've been commercially harvested and getting all the food that's left behind. There's a stat that 30% of food is actually wasted in the fields. That's horrendous. So gleaning is a great way to gather up that food, get it to people who need it, people who are facing food insecurity. Seed libraries is another great way to increase local food security, right? Rather than relying on large seed companies like Monsanto and who with their GMOs, that if start saving seeds, develop a seed library, then you're going to end up having seeds that are adapting to your climate, your microclimates, your particular climate. And as the climate changes over time, it'd be nice to have seeds that are kind of evolving with your local climate as best they can. So I want to talk a little bit now about economies, right? What do we do about that? So we seem to be moving towards, digital currencies and cashless society and stuff. So this first one might seem a little antiquated, but slow money is about buying from the mom and pop shops, right? The small independent store owners, right? Because they're going to be people who live in the community that you're shopping in. They're going to keep the majority of that money, except for what goes out to the producers of the products they're selling. You want to spend cash, because every time you spend a credit card, 2-3% or so gets siphoned off and goes to a bank, and it doesn't go into mom and pop's pocket. It just makes a bank more powerful, and they are certainly powerful enough. So that's kind of what slow money is about. Local currencies is like alternative currencies that you can create. This is much more of a community project, but a way to keep funds circulating within a community, right? When you're buying something from, a Walmart or Target or whatnot, very little amount of that money stays in your community, right? A large portion of it gets siphoned back to corporate headquarters and goes to executives and stock owners and things like that. So so if you have local currencies, then that doesn't really happen. That money all stays in the local community. I think the first local currency in the United States was in Western Mass, and I apologize if I get this wrong, but I think they were called Berkshires. So I don't know if that's still going on, but that was one of the first that started here. And it's just an idea of a way to, as I said, to kind of keep money and currency circulating in the local community. Time banks are another great way to accomplish things without, this is a very service-based thing, but to accomplish it without money. So in a time bank, an hour of my time is worth an hour of somebody else's time. So if I have skills, maybe garden consultations or, I don't know, I'm also a massage therapist, so maybe massage, then if I give an hour, then I bank an hour of time, and I can look at what services are available in that time bank and have somebody come over and maybe help me fix my gutters or fix windows. Or so it's just again a way to keep currency basically local, avoid the sucking sound of currency out of the local area. Sorry, that was not a very eloquent explanation of any of that, but hopefully you guys understood the concept.
I'll pop in an example in the chat too. I found one in Portland.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. You're talking about time banks. Yeah. There's a Seacoast time bank, I think, also that's based in Durham, New Hampshire. I think there's one that started down in Cambridge, Mass. I thought there was another one nearby, but it escapes me at the moment. So another thing I want to talk about in terms of economies are B Corps, which are benefit corporations. This is a new legal entity that companies can use to create their legal structure. And what makes them unique is that they adhere to a triple bottom line, right? So they pay attention to profit, because if you don't make a profit, you're not staying in business, but they commit to taking care of their people and the planet. So that's the triple bottom line. So they are legally bound to take care of those things, as opposed to like an S corporation where they are focused on profit and their only responsibility is to get money for their investors. That's it. So they don't really care about the others. So the B corporations are very much in tune with the ethics of caring for the earth, caring for the people, and caring for the future. Employee-owned businesses are a great way to go as well. I know it's kind of hard to convert existing companies into employee-owned companies, but when you have a company that's employee-owned, the employees have a vested interest in that company succeeding. They're going to care a little bit more. It helps to address wealth, the wealth gap and income inequality by making sure that the employees share in the profits of the business, and not just the executives or other stockholders. So there are some examples of this. One that comes to mind is Revision Energy here. They're a renewable solar energy company, and they are a certified B Corp and 100% employee owned. So they're taking care of their people, and they've committed to taking care of the planet. So some other ideas in economies are the sharing economies, right? And this is often called gift economies, where if you have an abundance of something, using garden as an example, you have a bumper crop of tomatoes and your freezer is full of sauce and you can't do any more canning, and you just start gifting your tomatoes. And maybe that's a bad example because everybody seems to get all their tomatoes at once, but so everybody will have an abundance of tomatoes. But it's the idea of just sharing your abundance, sharing any extra that you have, because there might be a time where you don't have extra, but somebody else does, and they share. And you just create that different culture of giving and not expecting anything in return, but knowing that somebody will be there to help me and share with me. So it's an attitude shift. So I think Charles Eisenstein wrote a book called The Sacred Economy that talks about gifting economies. So that's kind of a thick read, but a good read. So tool libraries is another way that we can help with our economies, right? I bought a wood chipper back, I think this was in 2007 or 8. I had a tree come down and wanted to chip it all up. And, I use my wood chipper maybe once or twice a year as I prune my trees and my shrubs, and I chip that up and use the wood chips in my garden. But, 353 days a year, it sits in my shed. So, everybody doesn't need to own a wood chipper, but if there's one in the neighborhood that can be lent around to people, then it takes burden off of people. They don't have to buy all their own tools, and helps to build community because you're sharing these tools with your neighbors and community. Less tools and things need to be produced. So, you're having an effect that way. So there's a tool library up in Portland at the Resilience Hub, which is a permaculture education center. And I think that's the other one that I know that's local, but a great way to build community and share resources. So building community, this is an essential part of this, right? Nobody's going to be able to change this, these systems on their own. We need to do this together, and the solutions are going to look different in different parts of the world. So we need that community, and love this African proverb. And, I've heard Justin use it a number of times as well, or refer to it. If you want to go fast, then go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Right. So we need each other to help each other, share our skills, share our efforts, share, just a shared struggle, if you will. So in talking about building community, here's some kind of examples of things that help to build community. So the first thing on the list is called a permablitz, and the picture in the lower right is a picture of a permablitz going on. And a permablitz is modeled after the old barn raisings, right, where a community will come and help a family build a barn in a day. So you have, many hands making light work and having a huge impact in a short amount of time. So it builds community. You learn new skills. There's so many wonderful benefits of it. Oftentimes, there, people will bring music or food and have a potluck at lunch or after or whatnot. And so they're great community events. And in a lot of the permaculture communities that I've worked with and known, permablitzes are kind of integral part of this, and they're really a lot of fun. So I want to talk next about an organization called City Repair. So this is an organization that was founded up in Portland, Oregon in the mid 90s or late 90s by a man named Mark Lakeman. And City Repair is about creating community space, right? It's about placemaking. Right. There are very few places in our society that you can go and hang out with people where you don't have to spend money. Right. There aren't places that we can go. Sure, there are, parks and stuff, but those are few and far between. But, there are malls, there's, cafes, there's restaurant, all these things, but you kind of have to spend money. There's nowhere that's just a commons, right? The small towns, when New England was first founded, there were a lot of commons, right? And these were places where people could come and gather and just hang out and run into each other and have, impromptu conversations. Justin and I were talking before this session here about how these Zooms are great. It's more convenient. More people can show up here. But when you have meetings and gatherings in person, there's more individual connections that can be made just, in the spur of a moment, like, oh, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. I've been meaning to talk to you. Or, somebody says, oh, I was thinking about you the other day. So there's all these kind of things when people come together that just kind of happen spontaneously, like an unknown good benefit, right? So City Repair, this picture in the upper right is an intersection in residential neighborhoods of Portland, Oregon, where they have reclaimed intersections to try to take some of the space that cars have dominated and make it a special place that they can gather. So these roads are not closed. Cars can still go through them, but they decorate them and paint them in a design that is agreed upon by all the neighbors in this neighborhood, and they put it out there, and that's painting. As cars approach, they see something or other, well, something special up here, and they're going to slow down, right? So kids feel safer out in the streets or playing near the streets, and there also can be closed off and hold celebrations in these spots. So it's not just about decorating the the intersection. They also build things on each corner. There's benches, there's kiosks, there's maybe a tea stand, maybe a little free library, all of these things that, places for neighbors to share resources, share time, just hang out. And it's a great way to build community, right, by placemaking. So the transition movement is a permaculturally designed movement that started in Totnes, England by a permaculture designer named Rob Hopkins. And he wrote a book called The Transition Handbook. And essentially the Transition Handbook is a response to climate change, peak oil, economic and political instability. And it's trying to make individual towns more self-reliant. Kind of what I was talking about before about the global network of villages. This is kind of a blueprint. And let's see. So this is kind of the book right here. Again, this is listed in my resources, but this gives you a blueprint for how to bring people in your community together and how to get started and the steps to take to start planning. So what they have in Totnes, England, they're like, well, what can we do? What can we produce? And I don't know how they came to this decision, but they decided that we're going to be a nut tree producer. So they planted nut trees all around Totnes, and they produce large nuts, and they have this economy around nuts where they can sell to neighboring villages and towns, and they become a producer. So they transitioned from that. They created their local currency to keep money circulating within their own community, time banks, things like that. They've kind of put all these things into action, and all to come up with what they call a low energy descent plan, right? Because right now with fossil fuels, relatively cheap, accessible energy, we have, essentially, well, I won't say free energy, but very cheap energy. So we do this in a completely different way than if we didn't have access to this energy. So things like composting, what do you do with your waste? Things like that. So anyway, transition movement is a great thing. It's kind of, I don't know what the latest count is of how many initiatives, but it's in several countries and, hundreds of trends or initiatives that have. So I believe there was one out in Keene or Peter, was it Keene? I think it was Keene. I don't know how they're doing. I haven't really checked in with their transition movement. So I put Grow National on the list because one of the benefits and side effects of building these community gardens and bringing people together to learn and grow food is we're building community, right? People getting to know each other, and combined with the Little Free Farm Stand, where we have people who have grown too much food in their garden. They share the abundance with people who are facing food insecurity or struggling to make ends meet, and can really use that assistance. So we're building a stronger community, meeting different people from different cultures, different parts of the world, and we're just making the community a little bit stronger. So I also listed in here Nashua Strong Towns, which I don't really know a lot about, and I hesitated putting in here, but I'm going to check them out. They have a meeting this coming Monday on Zoom. So if you just Google Nashua Strong Towns, you'll find their website, and their intentions are to create a more livable, walkable, bikeable city. So they want to look at infrastructure in the city and how we use our roads and things like that, and come up with solutions. So I think that's a great opportunity to look at our town and say, hey, how can we make this better? How can we adjust this system or create new systems? And lastly on this page, although a little out of order, I have something called the Rise Up Center. And this is a community center that was started out in Wilton, New Hampshire. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I haven't been out that way in a while. I used to spend more time out there, but this was started as a place to bring people together. Nicole, who runs the Rise Up Center, they have dances and community events and celebrations there. They also have music lessons, and they have healing, practitioners who are there who have space. And it's just another example of creating something, if you build it, they will come, right? There are people who are kind of starved for some sense of connection and community. So what we just need to do is create the spaces for them to come together and see what happens next. So in community, you often run into problems, or personalities, sometimes come together, or just sometimes it's hard. We're not really given tools or taught tools in our schools about, how do we talk to other people, and how do we get our needs met? How do we express that we have needs? And so we all have a different, varying levels of skills of being able to communicate. So I know I'm talking about this first, but it's listed last here. Nonviolent communication is a great tool that can be used to teach us how to talk to each other in a nonviolent manner, in order to understand what our needs are, express those needs to other people, and try to negotiate and compromise to make sure that our needs are met, right? Because anybody who's listened to any political debate or discussion, or anything in the political arena these days, very violent communication, blaming other people, and there's no sense of understanding or compassion. So learning skills like this can be very helpful. So back to the inclusive decisions, we want to make sure that everybody is heard when we're organizing communities and bringing people together. We don't want people to feel like they haven't been able to have their say, right? Because every individual as part of a community is important, and their needs need to be considered, and their views and opinions. So having consensus or some method to hear all of those opinions and then come to some sort of decision is important. And so I have this technique called sociocracy up here, and this was something that Justin and I kind of experimented a little bit with Grow Nashua. He kind of found this and took some training, but it's all about a procedure so that when making a decision, everybody has an opportunity, multiple opportunities to say their piece. And you go through rounds, and everybody says what they need to say about the topic, and then you have a chance to rebut what was said the first round, and you kind of go around like that until everybody is pretty much happy. And maybe you don't come to consensus, but you can make a decision based on nobody strongly objects to this, right? It's like, it's okay, people can live with this. So it just ways, so finding tools like this that can help us to communicate with each other, make decisions, very important when bringing community together. All right, so just a little bit here about energy. I talked about energy accounting, right? If you put more energy into something than you get out, then it's really not worth doing. So pay attention to that. In terms of energy use, this is more focused on electricity. We have the smart energy living pyramid here, and it talks about conservation, right? You can do so much with conservation by turning off things, unplugging your chargers, things they're constantly drawing, a small charge, turning off power strips, turning off monitors, turning out lights, just using less, conserving thing, and then getting into the more efficient things, sealing up your house, doing good insulation, and energy efficient appliances and lighting, things of that nature. And then get into the production of energy, which get more into the renewable energy. And this pyramid doesn't really talk about transportation. That's a whole nother topic, but that's something that needs to be addressed too. How we move people and goods around is very inefficient with everybody being in their own car. So is there a way for us to get back to more of a public transportation centered system, or are we going to have clogged roads and smog forever? So anyway, so getting to renewables, right? They are clean, they are decentralized, right? You don't have one big power plant. They are produced by many rooftops and many windmills or geothermal systems. So they're more resilient because they're decentralized, and it's locally produced. And speaking of locally produced, I want to just give a little shout out here to an organization called Hooray. Hooray stands for the Hillsborough Area Renewable Energy Initiative, and they educate people on solar technology. And if you're interested in doing it yourself, they help you to assess your site, design and size your system, help you with the permitting process, and acquiring all the materials. And then they also organize volunteer days called solar raisers, again, based on the barn raiser permaculture type model, where a bunch of volunteers show up in one day and mount all the panels up on your roof. So it's just a great way to, again, building community, learning new skills, and helping to address climate change. All right, cool. Wow, sorry, a lot of information. We got any questions here?
A lot of positive feedback. I don't think we have any questions though. A lot of good, some good shares, some details, some links. A lot of great examples. Thanks for diving into some of those real world applications and some people that are doing good things. It's encouraging to see that happening, especially, you know, when we consider some of the things that have gone on for so many years that have degraded our planet. It's nice to see that there are lots of organizations doing good things at local levels.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yeah, it is, and we can network these together and learn from what they've done, and you know, and on the backs of many, you know, we can move forward. So, right, well, we're almost done. I think I just have a couple more slides, actually, maybe just one, and then some resources. So, so this is again back to kind of the why permaculture. This is Bill Mollison, co-creator. You know, and he says that, you know, that we really need to make this transition from consumption to production. Right, small scale, start with our gardens, you know, and work from there. But you know, the sooner we start, you know, the more impact that we're going to have, more people we get on board, the bigger the impact. But I think one important point here is that it's really hard to change a system that you depend on, right? So we all depend on these industrial systems to meet our physical needs, and so, you know, we, again, back to Buckminster Fuller, what we really need to do is create new systems to meet those needs so that those others can atrophy and die off, because we depend on those. So we can't just, you know, chop them down, because then we're in trouble. So we have to kind of build our systems, replacement systems first. So here's just some resources, and there's a PDF file in the resources folder that Justin is going to share with you all, that that has these links and everything. But these are some organizations, websites, and meetups in the area, some in the area, some not, to learn more about some of the things that we talked about.
I'll email that out tomorrow along with the video and the slides.
Fantastic. Okay, and then here's some of the books that I might have mentioned today, and some others that are good references to start. Permaculture 1 was kind of the original paper that introduced permaculture to the world, from Mollison and Holmgren. We have the Permaculture Design Manual, which this is kind of the Bible. It has all the technical information, and this is mostly land management and food production stuff. But this is Bill Mollison's. David Holmgren's Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability really dives into the principles and helps you understand them and how to apply them. There's an Introduction to Permaculture and Gaia's Garden, which are great books for home scale, not too technical introductions to the concepts of permaculture. The Permaculture City is a great book, another one by Toby Hemingway, that talks about urban, right? What we can do in the cities, right? 50% of the world's populations nowadays lives in the cities. Concrete jungles, you know, we really need to retrofit those as soon as possible, and Permaculture City has some great ideas on that. So another great read, The One Straw Revolution by Masanobu Fukuoka. Really fantastic read. This is a story about him, how he really got in touch with nature as a rice farmer in Japan. It is really a cornerstone book for the permaculture community. Highly recommend it. And then, you know, Mycelium Running, the Paul Stamets book, wonderful information there about all the great things that mycelium and mushrooms can do. So yeah, let's see. So, you know, what are your next steps after listening to this, learning a little bit about this? You know, maybe pick up a book, read a book, check out a video or a library. You can go on to YouTube and Google permaculture or introduction to permaculture or permaculture and some other topic. There's so many videos out that way. In the resource folder, the resource file that is in the folder, I threw out a couple of documentaries that I've watched that are pretty good, but you know, and then, you know, maybe take a class or a workshop. But the important thing is to kind of find your niche, find what it is that you want to do, find your purpose and your passion, and, you know, join the movement and help to reverse some of this damage we've done to our lovely planet. So, right on. So here's some contact information. Again, the slides will be are in that resource folder. So you'll have all this contact information. But grab a screenshot right now if you want to grab my email, and fire off any questions that I may not have addressed. And I don't know, Justin, do you want to talk about the free farm stand, or I kind of mentioned it in our talk?
Yeah, I put the link in there. I can send it out tomorrow. It's got a pretty good resource for people to read afterward.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, if anybody wants to hang on for a minute, pop your screen on, ask questions. I know a lot of people are probably gonna scoot off here at the end, but feel free to turn your mic on and turn your picture on, and we can just chat for a little bit. I did have a question to throw out about your seven generations, Dave. I thought that we might be able to, anybody that stays after that might want to talk about whether they could possibly envision thinking about caring for 7 generations out from themselves. That was going to be kind of my
it's kind of a big number, and I think that number is that big because I think that's the point of it. Like, you can't imagine who's coming next after you, but you have to consider them because our actions today are going to affect them, whether they're positive or negative. There's going to be a ripple effect through time. So,
Tony, did you have a question?
Who? Me?
Oh, Tony.
Oh, Tony. Sorry,
well,
I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh, that's all right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I found this just incredibly informative. When you opened up with, what is permaculture? In my mind, I was, where you describe, you put corn and other plants in a certain order so that they thrive, but it's so much more. And I think we have all people that live in cities or condominiums where you can't have this kind of gardens. Is there any other public spaces to grow beside for people that could afford to pay for it, so to speak?
I'm not sure what the waiting list at Greeley Park is, but I know that's one of the other community gardens.
Do you have to be? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not really sure. You're not in Nashua, right? You're in Hudson or
I'm
something?
in Hudson. Yeah.
So I'm not sure what's going on over there, but I know Regenerative Roots over at Alvarin High School, I think they have some community plots there.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'll have to check that out. Yeah. That's very close to me. I can.
Yeah, they have a farm to a private farm, piece of private farmland that they use.
I go by it all the time. Yeah.
They allow for people to have a plot there.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, thanks.
Yeah. So the organization again is called Regenerative Roots. So you can Google them, find them.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. But you're right, condominium, it's like, what do? You might not be able to grow. There's always, there's often homeowners regulations that don't let you plant gardens.
Yeah.
My folks live in a 55 plus community, and they have a neighborhood, variance to be able to put a garden in and stuff. So there, I think there's way to work on that, but can't grow your own food outside, then you could have a small hydroponic system inside with a couple grow lights, get some greens going. You can do composting inside your house with either what's it called, kobayashi, which is fermenting, bokashi, or worm bins or things like that. And of course, all of the energy conservation, efficiency, all of those kinds. Your consumption habits, transportation habits, all of those things can be looked at.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, it's really a lot to consider when permaculture is most.
There's so much you can do.
It is, and it can be applied to so many things. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, very welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for attending.
I promise to come back and take a picture too. Again.
Yeah, the thing that's always that I always find interesting is I think is how much potential there is to, when you start thinking about that, when you get this permaculture mindset, is to really start, you start to see how so many things have, like I think Dave was talking once about having a fire in his backyard, and sometimes he starts to think about, oh, there's heat coming up and maybe I should be boiling some water on top of this fire so that, and cook something, right? Because there's all these resources that are available to us that we can use, and it's like, it's just so much, and we get so busy that sometimes we can't really take the time to utilize all of our resources. And that's one of the things that I like about Dave's personality, and also about this permaculture ideology or concepts that apply them so many ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they can be a philosophy to live by, right? How you live your life, how you approach things, how you approach other people. Again, a couple of my favorite, one of my favorite permaculture principles is, accept feedback and apply self-regulation, right? There are so many people in this world who you can't tell them anything, that, hey, you might have done this wrong, or, maybe you did this and want to hear it, but, I want to hear from everybody. How am I doing? Is that working? Is that good? What can I improve? How can it be better? It's kind of part of nature, that constant growth. So, so the principles can all be applied to individual life philosophies as well.
And have you tried thinking out that far, Dave, before?
The 7 generations.
Have you tried thinking?
No, I haven't, and partially because I don't have any children, and so I don't have direct descendants. But I do think about generations, like niece and nephew and their kids, and that. But I've never tried to think out that far, because I have thought that far back a little bit, because my dad did some geological research and traced one line all the way back to France in the 1600s. So that's got to be 7 generations. But but yeah, it's kind of incomprehensible, which
hard, right?
I think lends to the mind of indigenous people. Like in today's culture, we have so many distractions all the time, right? We don't have this time to deep think, right? But living back a couple hundred years ago, or 1,000 years ago, living off the land, living in your tribe, watching the cosmos go by every day, understanding the cycles of the moon and the sky and the stars, and understanding that, having that connection, you might be able to think a little bit deeper than we do. We kind of get distracted.
My grandparents always had gardens, and my parents did. We have like massive, and we lived in the city. We had tomatoes. We had, like, all winter long, we had the best pasta sauce, and mushrooms and everything.
San Manzaros, what are they called? San Marzano.
San Marzanos.
Yeah.
I don't know, but they
Those
were just,
tomatoes people rave about.
with only, cow manure, right? They just massive tomatoes, and my neighbors would line up.
Yeah,
that's good community, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right on.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Right on.
Well, great. Yes. Well, I think probably a good follow-up. I think as I was thinking about these classes here, and how maybe in the future we might be able to maybe dig in a little bit on some of these topics, like permaculture, and like what could this look like locally, and what are some things, like you pointed out some of those examples, but what are some other things that people might want to see? It might be good to have a conversation with you sometime that's just kind of open-ended, and people can jump on and add some thoughts and add some ideas and participate in a little bit of a way where we possibly start working on this as a community and saying, what's working currently, where can we put some of our energies, and maybe it's just directing people to like those websites that you said, but maybe there's somebody that's on one of these calls that's interested in looking into a time bank and establishing that. That would be a pretty neat thing to have in the city.
Or creating a transition Nashua initiative, to try to get people together to come up with some new plans.
Yeah, yeah. So we can consider that as
Absolutely.
another add-on to trainings.
Yep. Cool.
Well, all right.
Well,
Well,
thank you very much, everyone.
yeah, it was great to see you, Tony.
Great job. Yeah, great to see you all.
Everybody else here, that thanks for coming, and yeah, we will see y'all soon. We'll keep you posted. We'll get you details, and we'll see you at the next one.
Yep.
All right.
Right.
Be well.
Thank you, Justin, for hosting. Thanks everybody for attending.
Hi, Aaron.
All right.
Bye, folks.
Take care. All right, you can stop recording if you wanted to.